Okay, think I started the session, Melinda.
Oh, thank
Um,
goodness.
welcome. It's great to spend the afternoon or my late afternoon and your morning together. Um, hello, everyone on the call and on this webinar. Um, I'm quickly starting with a few housekeeping rules or with a few points, and then we're quickly jumping over into yeah, the real topic, the conversation that we have on our list for today. So, um, just to start with, who's the CSA? I hope the majority of folks joining this webinar know who the CSA is. We're a German project led by the Eco Association of the Internet Industry, and our core job is email, and that's why we're here today talking about it. We are certifying mass email platforms, and we're going to update our certification in a few months' time. But it's all about following best practices, supporting, developing, and implementing or help to implement email best practice standards to make email ecosystem a powerful, stable, and reliable environment to keep our jobs safe and keep having fun that we have had over. For me, it's been 20 years having fun with email, and I think for Melinda it's the same. So that's why we're here, and that's what we're supporting. And beside our mailbox providers partners who support the idea of there are senders of following that are following best practices, we've got a few supporters that are following our mission, supporting our mission, which is DMARC Advisor, Halon, DMartian, and Spamhaus. And I'm very happy today that Melinda said, yes, let's have that session together. A few notes here. You're all muted. If you want to ask a question, please use the question section in the GoToWebinar tool. Raise your questions. I will keep an eye on them and read them out to include them in the discussion and in the talk that I'm going to have with Melinda. Um, and if you want to know more about our supporters that I just mentioned, you can also download this small booklet as a PDF file from this session as well. So we uploaded it, and if you want to figure out more about them, um, feel free to download or contact us or me afterwards. And now let's have a talk. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Melinda, welcome to the CSA webinar. Good to have you here. How are you?
Hi. Oh, I'm doing great, and thank you so much for inviting me to this. It's absolutely a pleasure to be spending some time with you, Sebastian.
We are going to have a rough and tough conversation about IP and domain reputation, the buzzword that I feel we are falling since ages. Isn't that the case? So, what is domain and IP reputation from your point of view, from Spamhaus' point of view, and what role does it play in your daily job? And how long have you been busy with talking about reputation?
Oh my goodness. Well, I may have met many of you that have are joining today, and and absolutely thank you all for taking the time to join this conversation. As many of you may know, you have met me in the past. I'm Melinda Plemel, and I do work at Spamhaus, and I work as a consultancy specialist, which is a new concept, a new product that Spamhaus is right now beta testing, and I love to have conversations about that. If you're curious about what it is, you can always ping me and stuff. But yes, I have spent much of my career, if not all of my career, let's just say, discussing this really really interesting topic of IP and domain reputation. And as you know, this those are core drivers to your deliverability. I mean, regardless of the type of mail that you might be sending, whether it's marketing campaigns, whether it's transactional type emails, uh, in informational newsletters, that reputation of your sending IP and domain is absolutely key. And not to overuse this reference, but it really does act like a credit score. I mean, we use that often, but there's truth behind that. It determines if your message is trusted or not. So, if you're serious about email success, you definitely need to understand what shapes that reputation and how to protect it.
That's correct. What I like is exactly the analogy of a credit score, right? So that's how I, especially when I'm sitting together with my family and they are asking again, Sebastian, what are you doing? What is your job? Yeah, trying to keep up email reputation, help senders to do a good job in doing so. And yeah, what is reputation? What is email? And exactly is like you've got an account and you get credits on it, and you are at risk losing credits if you're not following the rules, because in the email ecosystem we have to follow those rules. And
Hmm.
yeah, then,
Hmm.
then you're turning into such a conversation like, how does that work? How do they figure
Hmm.
out, and what are the factors that play into and drive reputation? How can I lose credit scores, and
Hmm.
how can I
Hmm.
win credit scores? Is it easy? Is it difficult? How long does it take? All those quite common questions.
Hmm.
And yeah, are there factors about reputation that you are thinking um, became more or less useless over time? And did you recognize a change of there are new factors coming in? I mean, the world has changed, right? It's not been the
Yeah,
email ecosystem that we've been started in 15 or 20 years ago. So it's
right.
definitely a different world. So, what is your take on that? How did it change over time?
Honestly, I just want to say I'm glad I'm not the only one that are having these interesting conversations with friends and family, trying to describe what I do for a living. And, using that analogy certainly helps. I still think my dad believes, though, that I work for some kind of secret agency of some sort, but I'm going to let him believe that. So,
Right.
but, I mean, yeah, let's break it down just a little bit, right? Like, we know that there's two main factors that kind of go into reputation. You have your IP and you have your domain. And like you said, we've been doing this for a long time, and I do think like IP reputation is probably one of the oldest factors that have been tracked over time. I know for just from my experience, that has been something that has been in place since I've been in this space.
Hmm.
It essentially evaluates that trustworthiness of that IP, and not only is it used in the context of like email sending servers, but it also plays a part in web servers as well, which is something that's developed over time. Um, Domain reputation is very much the same thing. It's, I think, a more recent and recent in 10 years recent, but something that has been growing much over time. And I personally feel like domain reputation is one of the most important things that you should be paying attention to, because it moves with you. You can change IP addresses and you can change, service providers, but that domain follows you. It's like a digital sender identity, and it's often very, very much tied to your brand's reputation. um and once again, it goes back to that trustworthiness of yours. It's like it will determine, is your email going to land in the box that you want it to? Is it going to be filtered out? But there are factors that come into play that I think are still true today. Some things have changed, there's no doubt about it, and but there's still a lot of, like, there's negative metrics you look at and there's positive looks at metrics that you look at. And just on a very, very high level, mailbox providers look at reputation, and they'll look at things like, your history of your sending. Are you sending anything that's malicious? Are you sending content that's well received? Have you ever been associated with like phishing attacks? Are you hosting anything that could be considered bad, like malware or suspicious content? There's things like the age of your IP, the age of your domain. The newer it is, the more suspicious it can be. And these are just kind of a few examples of like what matters. And of course, when you really break it down, you know, the basics, right? Like we still look at the basics. So, you spend all this time, for example, a lot of time and a lot of energy go into crafting that perfect email. And because at the end of the day, you're really trying to motivate your audience to do something, whether it is to simply be engaged, whether it's to be informed, whether it's to drive them to your website and purchase something. When you spend all that time and then you send out a message and only 20% of your audience even sees that, why is that happening? Because you could possibly be having like bad reputation. Your reputation could possibly be very weak. So it's key in determining your deliverability. It directly affects trust, access, and performance. Even a minor dip in reputation uh, can send you to spam. So looking at those positive metrics, looking at those negative metrics are always going to be extremely important for you to maintain that.
I came across a discussion the other day. I think now it's been a year ago where I had this discussion. It's about,
Hmm.
I was trying to figure out what is the weighting of IP reputation against domain reputation. I mean, that's the obvious question
Great
I'm
question.
asked about the most. And in a discussion with a mailbox provider, I was said, hey, the take that we are doing on it is that for us, the IP reputation is identifying the infrastructure an email is coming from. Is that technically compliant what we expect? Is it authenticated properly? And what do we already know about the infrastructure the email is coming from? And as we know, we've got shared and dedicated IPs out there. It is a big mixture of everything. So senders, the different brands influence against each other. And so for a mailbox provider, it still does play a role. Where is the email coming from? Do I know that
Yep.
infrastructure? Do I know the servers behind? To already gave a little trust score. What you've mentioned is based on trust. And then
Hmm.
what the guy told me as well is, and our take is to decide whether you're landing in the inbox or in the spam folder is related to the specific domain. And because that is the explicit business card, if you want to, because that
Hmm.
identifies the real sender. We've got two level of senders. We've got a technical layer of sending, and we've got what you're saying. The marketeers are sitting there and having a hard time to make an engaging email, and but that differs from brand to brand, from business model to business model, and that makes the change. And that's why it's important to still keep an eye, and that's my personal take, on the IP reputation to make sure I'm sending from a proper platform to at least fulfill the raw fundamentals in expectations or in technical requirements to be able to start with the second layer and then having this engaging content. And that leads me to a very specific questions that I have been asked back in March, being on a trade show. Sebastian, what does content still play a role for reputation? And there was an interesting discussion that I had based on that. What is your personal take on it? How does content play a role comparing to IP and or related to IP and domain reputation?
That's a great question. And I've always considered IP, domain, and content as those kind of pillars to creating that sort of overall reputation. I
Hmm.
do think content certainly does continue to play a critical role in email and web reputation. Um, Even when you have a really strong infrastructure, poor content can certainly trigger negative reactions, which can trigger spam filters, right? I mean, for example, if someone receives a piece of content that one they don't like, they're going to react to that in a certain way. And there are systems out there that look at content because, and like back in the early days, I mean, we can all go and think about that the first thing that we looked at was content, right? To really gauge whether or not a
Right.
message was considered spam or not. And we go back and, the real famous, identifiers back in the day were, the Viagra ads, were like the fake Rolex kind of, the pump and dump sort of the stock pump and dump, the kind of, emails that would go out in the early days. And so we had filters really created around content. It certainly has evolved, and IP became, like I said, that sort of second factor, like to your point, like what does that infrastructure look like, that sending platform, that's identifier, then evolved into to domain to really sort of bring it full circle. But there's so much truth to the way in which you need to look at content and how that's going to play an impact into filtering. Now, I find that content is, not only are you going to look at, like, keywords sometimes, and those aren't necessarily going to make and break you when it comes to getting to the inbox. It certainly does have an impact, but it's also the way in which those recipients react to that content. And I think that is the biggest factor, because that does teach those systems this type of content, this information, the way that this is constructed, whatever it may be, is something that is providing a negative reaction, and that to me is critical for sure.
Exactly, and that was the outcome of the conversation I had. Is it changed over time? Looking at keywords 15 years ago, for example, or 10 years ago, totally shifted. I mean, you still have those critical keywords, and in a specific relation, they may still led you directly to the spam folder. But what came into play is the context in which the content does play a role. Is it engaging, whether or not? Um, I'm always making that extreme example. We've got casual dating out there, and there are
Mhm.
folks who are who are consuming this type of content, right? And mailbox providers are not willing to block it just because it is that very explicit content, because
Exactly.
those folks expect them to receive. And if this stuff is still engaging, which means to the mailbox provider there is a positive feedback on that received content, it pays back on a positive reputation. And to answer, and I hope I summarize it correctly, because there has been a question raised in the question section. Um,
Excellent.
when we see reputation based block SMTP responses, they almost always reference to IP reputation. Thoughts on this?
Very true.
Do we
Yep.
do we think we will start to see more domain based blocking from mailbox providers in the future? So two questions, and I think that comes back to what we've just talked about. If a platform is gathering a lot of senders who do have a questionable reputation. And when I'm talking about senders, I'm talking about brands. So if an ESP is
Hmm.
collecting all those questionable brands, or a platform is known for it is easy to hijack that platform to do an account takeover and sending out scamming emails, which happens from time to time. Even though we've got security mechanisms in place, it does happen that spammers take over an API key or a login, and they send their scam out of a legitimate email accounts, which end up
Hmm.
into spam. And when this happens quite often from a specific platform, for sure, where does it end up? For me, at the IP level, because that's the identifier. The mailbox provider understands, okay, that is the space where that traffic is mainly coming from. But we
Hmm.
will definitely see more precise and differentiated blocking based on domain, because mailbox providers are able to really distinguish this is a good sender and a bad sender,
Hmm.
in the way like this sender is able to engage their folks and they are sending out the stuff the users and subscribers expect, against the others who are not expecting it. And so that's
Hmm.
my take. I don't know if you agree and if you're You want to
Yeah,
add
I mean,
something?
absolutely. I mean, spot on with that. Like, will mailbox providers at some point start sending bounce codes or error codes that identify a domain? Possibly. I'm assuming like any kind of information, like we have evolved so much in this space. From, in the very beginning, and I know Sebastian, like we've just kind of mentioned, we've both been doing this for such a long time, so we've seen this evolution, to where you're getting absolutely no insight other than, in the very beginning, you might have been, like spam assassin, for example, you might have been, triggering spam assassin, and then, return codes would come back with that identifier, that IP address, because that was something that was common throughout any message that was sent. And we have systems that have been built on that for years, and now we have moved into this, domain reputation because of that, what you just spoke of, that it does happen. I'm not going to say it can happen easily, but it certainly can happen where you have folks that are malicious and will jump to different platforms to do their damage, to send the messages that they want, whether it be phishing messages or things like that. And and it can certainly ruin those, that IP reputation, but that domain is going to follow you. And IP is huge. I think with IP, it is still the foundation to the majority of filtering companies, mailbox providers, reputation services. Any of those are going to use that IP address. But as time is going on, and it's like authentication has evolved and things like that, domain is paying such a heavier hand in truly what that reputation looks like, simply because an IP can shift, right? Like, but there's going to be common factors around a domain, and you can talk about domain and how people can spoof those as well and things like that, and that's why we have authentication, et cetera, et cetera. But um this industry moves a little slow, but it has in the last, probably, I don't know, gosh, time is weird ever since COVID. I think 5 years was not that long ago, but apparently we had COVID during that time. But like, 10 years ago, people started to recognize, probably a little longer, recognize that, yeah, IP is certainly still an extremely strong signal, and that's what a lot of things are going to be keyed off, and that's how information is going to be shared. But domain is going to come in there, and at some point, um, it could possibly also be included in some of those bounce back messages to help you, really maintain your reputation.
Following up on that and going a little more into depth on that, I've been asked a question in the past days preparing that webinar, and the question was, um, how does IP reputation and domain reputation influence each other? So how can they burn each other? Am I able to burn a good IP reputation from a proper platform with a bad domain reputation? And if I'm moving in ESP, can I burn my proper domain reputation ending up on a platform which may not have the best IP reputation because it's linked to their infrastructure? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, yes, absolutely. I think, they're each critical to each other, right? When you taking IP, as that first step and that first thing, looking at that infrastructure and where that's at. If your IP reputation is bad, consistently bad, that certainly can have an impact on your domain, not only just your main domain, but any subdomain under that as well. And as you move from IP to IP or platform to platform, the focus is going to shift a little bit more to that reputation of that domain, because that domain is going to have some type of history to it as well. And absolutely, I can speak from, Spamhaus perspective, but we look at everything. I mean, we look at everything when it enters into our systems or into one of our networks. And so you can have even a good reputation on a domain, but if you happen to exist on an infrastructure that is problematic, and not even necessarily by your doing, like you can be a good sender, but you live in a bad neighborhood, quote unquote,
Hmm.
that definitely impacts your reputation. And that can really have an impact on the way that your mail's delivered, and really and how people view that domain. Like I said, that domains are often tied very, very closely to your brand. And so if you're in any way not seen as trustworthy, that's that's going to impact the way that people want to engage with your brand. And that at the end of the day is huge. Like, do people want to come to that website? Can they trust it? Can they trust putting data in or providing data to you? It can impact the way that search engines work. If your domain is considered tarnished, you may not be served up in a search engine like you would if you had a good reputation. So they are very, very closely tied. I mean, they're married essentially, right? Like one almost one can certainly exist without the other, but both of them together are going to be that's truly the picture that you're looking at. So you have to really watch both sides of it.
That is correct, and that links me to a point that is also always discussed: is, Sebastian, dedicated or shared IPs? What is best? And my answer always is, if you want to have control over your deliverability, and you want to understand what's going wrong, or what's working fine, just think about, is it better to have a little dedication, or, like you said about the bad neighborhood, you don't know the bad neighborhood when you move from one ESP to another. And that's
Right.
that's that's my recommendation I'm giving, even in an early pitch-in phase, deciding for a new ESP platform. Either you have a serious talk with your future provider, and they are honest with you and saying, hey guys, we are maintaining and keeping shared IP infrastructure, which is fine. There's nothing against
Hmm.
it. But then my follow up question would be, what is the neighborhood I'll be in when I start sending through your platform? Let me know, right? If
Yeah.
I'm the only white sheep against all black sheeps on your platform, it's gonna impact your domain reputation, starting from a bad IP reputation, because it,
Hmm.
it says
Hmm.
something to the mailbox provider receiving an email from a maybe proper platform up front, and then afterwards seeing the same traffic, because you will not probably not change your email strategy and your content strategy right away with moving from one ESP to another ESP. But it
Hmm.
raises questions on a mailbox provider side. Okay, the fundamental basis, the technical basis changed. We know that there is crap coming from that platform. Why is that trustworthy domain suddenly sending from that as well? So that raises
Hmm.
questions, and that needs to be in mind of especially the marketers, because the marketers mainly decide to move tools. It is not the technical guys in the back end to say, hey, come
Yeah.
on, because for them it's just a few settings that change, and that's it.
Hmm.
um so that's what I'm always having in mind about this influence.
Hmm. Hmm.
um I don't know if what you think about it, or
I,
what you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we always do preach, try to own your own reputation. And that does include, like having a dedicated IP so you have full control. I mean, not everybody has that like opportunity to do that. Like, I think when you are, larger entities and, you have massive sending platforms and things like that, having a dedicated IP is certainly beneficial, and it's easier done, right? Because you can control so many factors around that. But it's not the case for a lot of folks. Like, there are a lot of smaller centers out there. And, let's be real, like since COVID, things have shifted drastically. Like there are more smaller businesses out there that are in a shared environment,
Right.
and not always do they have the control of who are they living next to. I do feel like, ESPs also recognize this, and they do have created probably pretty significant pooling strategies. Like, there's always going to be, I go back and I always think of these bell curves, you know what I mean, where you're always going to have like the new or the lower or the questionable reputations, and you're going to start over here. But as you grow and as you send more, you're probably going to shift pools that are going to be more reflective of what type of sender you are as well. Like, if you do have that engagement, if you are, sending a mail that's really well received, you can move into a pool that's going to even help your reputation to some degree. Um, but yeah, your domain is always, especially in those shared environments, your domain is going to be looked at more critically, right? That's going to be the factor that they're going to monitor closely. Because I know, like, just speaking, from the hat that I wear today, we certainly don't want to list any IP address, because one sender within this pool of, senders did something horrific.
Mm,
We want to, it certainly can happen. You certainly can have an IP listed and stuff because of that. But we also know that that has an impact much greater than just that sender.
right.
And so, you look at like the history of things, like determining, like, is this a legitimate, should we continue to block this whole IP because we have enough evidence that says not only is this guy kind of bad, but yeah, there's several other folks in this neighborhood that aren't that great either. So, we're going to list them. Or is this like the majority of this pool of this IP, these folks that are in this IP, it's sending from this IP, are pretty good and don't have problems and look to be doing things that are good. And so then you focus on, yes, let's list the domain instead. So then you're not hurting the masses. You're just really trying to focus and target on the one that's doing the damage.
Right.
So
Um,
question is tough, dedicated, shared. It's tough. On the one hand, you control everything. On the other hand, there is that possibility of helping improve reputation as well if you're in a shared environment. So it's a tough
right.
one.
Right. What I loved is the more dedicated you are, the better you can even the better you can monitor it and you know what's
Hmm.
going on. So less side effects you need to consider. So that's the take that I've taken. But yeah, there are the advantages, and that leads me to a question that's always coming up as well. Does the size of a sender matter? So what about small senders? I always hear small senders complaining and talking, hey, it is hard for us. How do we, especially when it comes to warm up IPs or domain, um, are, yeah, even technologies like like Spamhaus and mailbox providers, are you considering the size of a sender? Does that matter, and how?
Uh, yeah, I think absolutely right. Like, I think, things like, you, it does matter. It certainly does matter to an extent. Large senders are expected to really follow strict protocols. They're expected to maintain, extremely low complaint rates, and implement, like, things like authentication and things like that. Whereas, small senders, I feel, are given a little bit more leeway.
Hmm.
They can make a mistake, and it's not going to be as impactful to them as like as a larger sender might be, um,
Do I understand
impacted by
you
that.
Do I understand you right that you think the tolerance level for a small sender is given much more from a mailbox provider than to a large sender? Is that what you're
I
trying to
think
say?
that there, maybe in a certain way, I think that there is certainly, there's an expectation that larger senders need to follow the rules. Not that everyone doesn't need to follow the rules, but larger senders definitely, have a much greater impact, right? They're
Right.
sending out just more messages, and they reach a much larger audience. And so they are looked at and held to higher standards in a lot of way. Where smaller senders, where their email lists like are smaller, and so any and the impact to something going wrong to them is felt much heavier to a smaller sender, because one little thing can make a big difference for them.
Yes.
And you can certainly be listed, but I do think there is, like, there are considerations that come into play when you look at like the history of anything. And that's just it. There's I look at like any kind of um scoring or filtering. There's definitely time frames to that. Like there's the short time frame, like you're going to get some immediate feedback, and that certainly can cause some listings. And then
Mhm.
there's that longer range of time that they're really taking consideration. So I think between larger and smaller senders, you're both expected to do the right thing, but the impact of like error can definitely have it's much different for both. One could be absorbed a little bit better, where the other is a much higher impact to what you're doing.
That makes total sense, and I get you. I'm supporting that as well. So,
Yeah.
um, the advice I'm always giving to smaller senders is, take a deep breath before you do any action and
Hmm.
carefully look at your domain. What will be the domain that you are used to send? Because you
Yes.
may have started already building up a small brand marketing around your, I don't know, online shop, your whatever business it is. And it's definitely
Hmm.
worth to transfer this already existing reputation with this at that moment, maybe not directly linked to your sending domain, but it does exist maybe
Hmm.
for a certain time already. And choosing the right sending domain close to your brand, to your website, to your service, that helps you already pushing your
Absolutely.
reputation up front. I see many senders just using random or pre prep what is the English word? Predefined domains, out of the box
Hmm.
domains, just
Right.
signing up to a platform and sending out, even if it's a few and or a few hundred and few thousands emails. But those domains are random domains, and they are not supporting and earning the reputation that you may have already built up. And I mean,
Hmm.
email is just another box you may tick in your whole marketing story. And small brands should at this point still start to think about, okay, what am I doing? What am I going to transport? What is the messaging
Hmm.
just using a specific domain?
Yep.
Um, Looking at the technical fundamentals is one thing, and in a shared environment using shared IPs, there may be the advantage to be quickly up on traffic and earning an
Hmm.
already good IP reputation, but then it drills down. Mailbox providers are looking at the specific domains, and
Yes.
what I observed over the just recent times, 1.5 2 years, um, businesses with a serious website, with a serious service, which adds value to the users there, have much better success in email deliverability, because there's something trustworthy behind it. It's not just
Hmm.
email. So mailbox providers started looking outside the box,
Hmm.
of what does impact the reputation as well. Does that brand have a good standing in search and e-commerce environment in general? That's
Hmm.
why I personally see cold email more and more going down, because in most cases it comes from domains that are just randomly set up, send emails, and then going down. But those emails raise big question marks on the mailbox provider side. So
Hmm.
it is worth to sit down and really think about what's going to be my domain segmentation strategy for building up my future. And for all the brands that are currently working since years already in that, it is worth to rethink some strategies, because what I figured out in the past is you need to maintain and to warm up a domain reputation as well. I came
Hmm.
across years
Hmm.
ago. I think it has been now 10 years ago, no,
Hmm.
maybe 8 years, something around that, where certified IPs back in our days where we worked for other companies, IPs have been certified, but there was a domain
Hmm.
switch because the
Hmm.
brand there was a rebranding from marketing side, and suddenly there was no deliverability with the huge mailbox providers, with one of the huge mailbox providers out there, and just because of the domain switch, the domain was
Hmm.
unknown, and it
Yeah.
couldn't be related to any other activity in the web, and so we needed to warm up again. There was an existing IP reputation, but just the single domain reputation and the missing one raised the question mark. How do we deal with that? Yeah, first reaction of a mailbox
Yeah.
provider, traffic I don't know. I secure in the spam folder to secure my users. That's a typical reaction there. Um,
Hmm. Hmm. I just like that point that you just made about like, creating that domain that really identify that brand. I think we live in a time where people are more skeptical of a lot of things that they received in their inbox, and they may be looking at it a little closer because we've spent years educating people, right? Like to look at certain factors. And as especially smaller senders out there, I mean that identity, that brand identity is critical for their success. And so having a domain that matches that brand first off is ideal. Like right there, that gives people a sense of like, oh, it should be coming from this place. But over time, I mean, it doesn't take away the fact that you've got to be building this reputation. It takes time to do so, and you're constantly also having to look for those folks that are out there trying to spoof you and things like that. But I think as a first step for anyone is having that domain identify you in a way that people are going to recognize is a key factor.
Right. And what I'm also seeing at small brands, and what I think still should be developing and changing, is small brands should also take the time and use the support of their vendors in setting up the domains properly. I always
Absolutely.
hear, yeah, I don't know how to set up the email authentication stuff properly for my domain. Even though they have a domain for their web shop, there are still folks that are sending through their Gmail address, through their whatever free mail address,
Hmm.
and now, with the strengthening of the requirements regarding authentication and DMARC, it becomes harder, and the emails will get lost somewhere in space, and they will not be received by the subscribers that may expect them. But all ESPs are willing to support even small brands to say, hey, if you run
Yep.
your website on brand.com or whatever domain it is, please delegate it to us, or let's have a small call or a short call together, and the experts from the ESP platforms will help you to set up the domains with a final
Yeah.
goal. You get the reputation on your brand domain, on your specific domain, and that assures that the user experience is right, because they are expecting emails coming from exactly that domain. If
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
if I shopped at brand.com, I expect the purchase confirmation from brand.com and not from brand.com at gmail.com. Doesn't make any
Right.
sense.
Right.
And
Right.
so that there's still the learning curve that we need to go. I definitely agree with you.
I think authentication is probably one of the most critical first steps, when you're setting things up. I mean, even legit senders, if they don't have authentication, can be certainly looked at as like uh, a fake website, as if they could be like considered to be spoofing, things like that. But authentication, I think for anything, and you're right. Like I mean, I get like when you're very starting, like you do something at home, and that's a lot of like this is where great businesses are formed, or like these small ideas from your house. And so you may start out with using a very generic domain, but quickly moving to your own domain and quickly moving to some type of authentication is really a huge first step, in my opinion, to start building that reputation.
That's exactly a good point. I've been also asked, Sebastian, hey, come on, we're a small business. There are billions of businesses out there. Why should a spammer or a scammer or any other criminal use exactly my domain or my business to spoof?
Hmm.
That is right. They
Yeah.
may not think about that specific shop, but what's going on outside there? Those criminals are scanning the internet and they are looking for the open backyard door. And they will find, even if it's a small one, they will find it. And even
Hmm.
if you, as a small sender, are the last one to leave that door wide open, you'll be the access for malicious stuff that's going to be sent out, even for a short period of time. And the question I'm asking back is, do you want to be the one everyone is finger pointing because you left the only open door in the backyard? And
Yeah.
I went through it as well with our domains at certifiedsenders.org. So let's have a serious talk. I've been making aware of, hey, there is still, you are still lacking on your own domains, and they've been right, because I had
Hmm.
exactly the same thinking. I mean, I'm small, right? I'm a small sender. Who should think about us? And it's exactly to that point. If I'm the last
Hmm.
open door, it will be used. And
Yep.
to authentication, um, I know that there is a tough discussion always going on. That's complicated. I don't know anything what DKIM is about and SPF is about. What is your recommendation if someone says to you, "Hey, come on, this is technically so complicated. I don't know how to deal with it." What is your recommendation on
Do it.
that?
I mean,
Right.
like,
That's true.
it's to your point. I mean, it's so important, and the reason it's important is because, you know, if there's scammers out there, they're going to look for an opening no matter where it's at. And we know in the past, the way we got to authentication, right, is like it started with, things like, banks, right? Like banks not being authenticated, and so scammers and malicious actors out there, that was their door. Well, now, these entities real have recognized that because of certain things that have taken place, like huge data breaches that have taken place, and damaged reputation. They've spent millions of dollars, fixing things, and trying to build their reputation back up. So now that focus is shift because these larger entities have locked it up a little bit better. They're using authentication, so they now these malicious actors are looking for, like you said, the opening the doors to these small businesses, where I may sit here in my basement thinking like my little business isn't going to be impacted, but it certainly can. Before you even get off the ground, your reputation could be destroyed, your brand could be destroyed. And while it is difficult to do, it is extremely important to do. And start with sort of the easiest steps first. Like, we know getting your SPF set up is so easy anymore. I mean, once you get a domain, it's the ability to do that is right there as well. It's just a couple clicks of that button, right, to get that set up. And sure, the more difficult thing is going to be, the DKIM and then and DMARC as well. But working with groups like, that are out there right now that really specialize in this, help with that heavy lift. And while you may not see the importance of it at this moment, you certainly will see the value of it when something bad goes wrong and you wish you had it. So, do it in the beginning, go through those growing pains as quickly as possible, because at the end of the day, like down the road, you're going to be very, very grateful that you have those in place.
And that's a good point. And I know that even in mass email marketing and mass email commercial email sending, we are always thinking about deliverability. So we are authenticating best because we want to receive our emails, or we want to push our emails into the inbox. And it is being part of a discussion in the past month. I found, and this discussion was around the sender requirements that Google, Yahoo started with, and Microsoft
Mm.
just joined. Um, and I found the statement about the motivation very interesting. It is not so. Following those requirements and best practices is not the proof that the brand is having and looking for a, a good deliverability. The motivation, and that pays back to the reputation again, is when a brand applies those requirements, it it raises the commitment, or it gives the commitment to fight abuse in the email
Hmm.
ecosystem, to say, hey, I'm the one who does not permit to misuse my domain because I secure my domain with SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. And the nice thing on top, that I've been asked also a lot of times is, what is my personal take about DMARC? And I'm always answering, DMARC is the very first tool for you where you can brief a mailbox provider how to interact and manage your, or an email coming in from your domain. If someone is faking your domain and trying to misuse your domain and saying, hey, if it's not me, reject it right away, help me
Hmm.
protecting my domain, this is something that we can now really make use of.
Hmm.
And I had the statement, and the statement from a mailbox provider contact that I talked to, who really said, "Hey, it improves your reputation. You're committing to, hey, you as a brand stand side to side or shoulder to shoulder next to us as a mailbox provider or filtering provider, and you are fighting the same." Which means abuse in the email ecosystem, and
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
returns, and hey, if you're doing that, we accept your emails, and it's going to be end up where it needs to be ended up,
Hmm.
in the inbox. So not just always trying to trick and find tricks to improve the email deliverability into the inbox, but being part of the whole story, like, let's protect our email ecosystem, helps, and
Hmm.
authentication at the very beginning. And I do not exactly know how my car works, but I know it needs proper tires and proper brakes. And I don't know, I don't always ask how it works, but it works, and I just do it, and I put proper
Hmm.
tires on it.
Right. Right.
Right. Um, what can I do if my reputation is broken?
Oh gosh.
We've got we've got a few minutes, and that's always to say, Seb, if I've broken it, what can I do,
don't
Melinda?
don't lose hope, because it has happened to others in the past, and we've all survived and stuff. But I mean, to your point, like, check like the sender requirements, make sure that you're following that list, because they're these mailbox providers are putting that out there as like, hey, minimum requirements right here, at least start here, make sure that you're doing all those things properly. Authentication, of course, double checking your authentication, making it set up, get those reports, like get those reports sent to you so you can keep an eye on things, and put some kind of policy into place for sure. um, Immediately look at your list, look at how you obtain and grow your list, and the ongoing maintenance of that list. A lot of times, reputation falls because of the list that you have. I mean, it starts at the very beginning, like what type of permission are you getting? What's that level of permission look like? And then don't just stop there, but throughout that entire life cycle, constantly be looking at your list, removing bounces, unengaged users, things like that. um, Look at how you can segment things, dissect that up a little bit, and if there's a group of folks that have always been completely engaged with you, lean on that a little bit heavier, like definitely like focus on them for a while to help increase or build up that reputation. At the same time, those folks that are not, that this may be the time to say goodbye to them. um I'm not a fan of IP or domain jumping, but you may want to go through another sort of warm up to a certain degree. Look at the blacklist that you're on, these kind of things like that, and the reasons why you're being blacklisted. Did you?
And these are exactly good points. It's definitely
Right,
worth taking some time to look at the causes that may have impacted your reputation negatively, because
right,
if you're not figuring out what was the root cause, you're running directly into this next issue. Jumping from IP to another IP and from one domain to another domain doesn't
yeah,
change anything, because it creates kind of loop. And
yeah,
you're absolutely right. What I'm always recommending as well: take time to figure out what you've done, or what went wrong,
yeah.
to reduce that. And what's definitely worth, and that's what always worked best for me, is not immediately changing anything. I mean, finally,
Right.
if everything's broken, you need to change it, right? But I even with large programs, there was a great chance, and it always worked out, to rebuild the reputation. It is a hard time, and it is much harder
Hmm.
to rebuild a reputation, than to burn it down. But
Yep.
even a burned reputation is a reputation, and mailbox
Right.
providers on a long term are not forgetting that you have had a solid reputation before the impact had. And
Absolutely.
just
Yep.
slowing down, restarting, and rebuilding on the existing is, in the majority of cases, much more worth than immediately acting, changing IPs. And we need a new domain, because a new IP and a new domain has exactly the same effect like a broken reputation. It
Right.
has
Right.
nothing.
Right.
And
Right.
at least the broken reputation for a specific domain is already known. You are known. And I mean, looking into a human relationship, what are you how do you interact with your partner if you had a real argument? You're not changing
Hmm.
the partner right away, right? You start slowly to come back into a conversation. Hey, I've done something wrong, something went wrong. I understood what I've done wrong. I
Yeah.
mean, that's human
Yeah.
behavior, right? And using
Right.
that analogy, for me, works for rebuilding reputation in either IP and domain world as well.
Yep. The first thing is breathe. Just breathe,
Yes,
right? Like this, like take a moment, breathe, because you don't want to react. You definitely want to look back. You want to take things like, when did it go wrong, and what was that reason behind that? And like, I mean, reputation is not just this short moment in time, but it's a long term thing. I mean, there's certainly that first 24 hours where people are reacting to something, and that's going to be reactive filtering is going to come into play, things like that. And then you have a little bit longer, like a midterm where it could be up to like 30 days and stuff. But you also have this long-term reputation that is played in. So like, if your long-term reputation is shown that you have been like this, stand up, internet citizen, and you just happen to have this bad day, you don't need to like freak out, jump shit, change IPs, domains, and things like that, because that's playing to your side. You just take a step back, look at where things went wrong, and then course correct that. And in the long run, that is so much better than just reacting and getting a new IP or a new domain, which I know you and I have both seen. Despite our recommendations, senders have done that. They have certainly been like, well, this isn't working, it's taking too long, it's too hard, I'm just going to do this. And at the end of the day, that is not going to make it any better for you. That hole's just getting a little bit deeper, and it just becomes harder to get out of.
that's right. Melinda, I'm afraid we are at the top of the hour. It has been a
Well, that was
pleasure.
enjoyable, it really has, and
Uh,
I just deeply appreciate the time for sure.
is there anything where you feel I need to state it before we stop that webinar? Did we miss anything?
I think we're all in this together, and I think at the end of the day, so many folks, especially the ones that join these webinars and stuff, we're all here to help strengthen the trust and safety of the internet. And, we're here. We collaborate. We're not these like crazy strange entities, but we're all in this together, and so we're here to help as well.
Cool. Melinda, it was a pleasure. Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to see you soon.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks for joining, folks. The information about our sponsors, specifically Spamhaus, is in the download section. Thanks for joining, and maybe we see each other in one of the next webinars. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Have a good one. Bye, Melinda.
Bye bye.